Welcome back. We start our news bulletin from the US, where more than 65,000 people are tested positive for COVID-19 in the past 24 hours. The countrywide cases have crossed 3.1 million with over 133,000 deaths. The global number of coronavirus cases has exceeded 12.2 million, with the death toll nearing 555,000. This report has details.
The new coronavirus is wreaking havoc in the Americas, tumbling records of daily deaths and infections. In the virus epicenter of Latin America, Brazil has reported over 1,200 deaths, while Mexico recorded 730 fatalities in the last 24 hours. Bolivia's President Janine Áñez has tested positive after Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro, who doctors say is recovering well. Meanwhile, U.S. infectious disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci has blamed the unprecedented spike in cases on the haste to open up the economy. Doctors and nurses are struggling to cope as COVID-19 patients flood hospitals in over 36 states of the U.S. California is facing the double threat of rising coronavirus numbers as it enters peak wildfire season.
I want to encourage everybody in the same spirit of responsibility as it relates to mitigating the transmission of COVID-19 to see what we can do to mitigate the loss of lives and property by focusing on evacuation plans, focusing on the needs to do the kind of, just work at the house.
South Africa has announced its highest daily infections with over 13,500 testing positive. Africa's most developed country is now a hotspot with over 238,000 cases. Algeria is reimposing travel restrictions and has increased testing in a bid to stop a rise in infection. Over in Australia, Prime Minister Scott Morrison says the number of overseas arrivals will be capped at 4,000 people each week.
We also agreed today a reduction in the number of inbound arrivals into Australia across those ports that are able to accept returning Australian citizens and residents. Of course, there are no flights going into Melbourne, into Victoria, for obvious reasons.
In Asia, China has reported 4 new coronavirus cases, down from 9 a day earlier. South Korea's daily virus cases fell below 50, but imported cases and infections tied to churches continue despite enhanced measures.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, the death toll from COVID-19 has crossed 5,000 after another 75 people lost their lives. The Ministry of Health says more than 2,500 cases have been reported in the past 24 hours, with the tally crossing 243,000. The ministry said over 149,000 people have recovered from the virus so far. It said among over 89,000 active cases, 2,375 are critically ill. The province of Sindh is the worst hit with more than 100,000 infections now, while Punjab has reported over 85,000 cases. Moreover, India has reported its biggest single-day surge in COVID-19 cases with more than 26,000 new infections. With another 475 deaths overnight, the nationwide toll is nearly 22,000. The Health Ministry said major cities like Delhi, Mumbai and Chennai were badly affected by the virus. The new cases take India's total number of infections to nearly 794,000. The Health Ministry says there are over 276,000 active coronavirus cases in the country. Moving on, Israeli forces have shot and martyred a Palestinian youth in the occupied West Bank. In a statement, the Palestinian Health Ministry said the citizen was killed in Kufl Er's village near the northern city of Salfit. The incident took place after clashes broke out between Israeli soldiers and young Palestinians in the village. Health officials said the martyred youth succumbed to wounds after he was shot in the neck. Eyewitnesses said the Palestinian was shot in cold blood while out walking with his friends. Tensions in the region are high since Israel announced plans to annex major parts of the West Bank this month. Now, in a related development, a subcommittee in the U.S. House of Representatives has approved a measure that will restore aid to Palestinians. Trump administration cut off aid in 2018 after Palestinian officials dismissed the president's peace plan. Committee chairperson Nita Lowey introduced the amendment. The step will restore $255 million in aid to Palestine during the 2021 fiscal year, which begins on 1st October this year. The amendment will effectively strip the authority of Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to suspend aid to the Palestinian territories. Lawi said non-governmental organizations working in the West Bank and Gaza will benefit from the funds. The US has announced sanctions against 4 Chinese politicians, accusing them of human rights violations against minorities in China. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Regional Communist Party boss Zheng Guanggu, 3 other officials and their families will be barred from entering the US. Chen is the most senior Chinese official ever to have been blacklisted by the US. The sanctions were imposed under the Global Magnitsky Act, a law that allows Washington to target human rights violators around the world. The act mandates freezing any US assets and prohibitions on Americans doing business with them. Beijing denies any mistreatment of minorities and has threatened retaliation against any sanctions by Washington. North Korea says another summit with the US will be unnecessary and useless as long as there is no change in Washington's stance. Kim Jo-jong, the sister of North Korea's Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un, said Pyongyang will denuclearize, but Washington will have to take major steps. In a statement carried by state media, she said the resumption of talks depends on Washington ending its hostilities. Kim said Pyongyang will not give up the Yongbyon nuclear complex in exchange for sanctions relief. She said Pyongyang will not alter its strategies just because North's leader and US President Donald Trump have a cordial personal relationship. Earlier, Trump and US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo expressed hope to reopen the stalled negotiations. South Korean police say they have found the body of Seoul City Mayor Park Won-soon. State media quoted police as saying the mayor's body was found in northern Seoul near where his phone signal was last detected. Earlier, police said it had mobilized nearly 400 officers and drones to search for the longtime mayor of Seoul. The search for the mayor started after his daughter reported him missing, saying he had left a message like a will. As a mayor of a city of nearly 10 million people, Park was one of the most influential politicians in the country. Authorities have not released the cause of death yet. In another news, Pakistan's Minister for Human Rights, Dr. Shirin Mazari, has written a letter to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights about the worsening situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir. In a letter addressed to the Commission Chair Michelle Bachelet, the minister expressed grave concern over India's illegal annexation of the occupied valley. Dr. Mazari highlighted the forcible transfer of civilian populations to and from Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Mazari said inaction by the international community has emboldened India to violate international human rights law. She said that India has issued around 25,000 Indian citizens' domicile certificates in occupied Jammu and Kashmir in a blatant violation of 4th Geneva Convention. Mazari called for an urgent intervention by the UN High Commissioner to end the breaches of fundamental human rights norms. Meanwhile, Pakistan says India is using terrorism as an instrument of coercive policies against its neighbors and its minorities. Speaking at the virtual counterterrorism week at the United Nations, Pakistan's envoy Munir Akram said Islamabad has evidence of India's involvement in major terrorist attacks in the country. The envoy said India is financing terrorist organizations to impede the China-Pakistan economic corridor. He went on to say that India should be prosecuted for war crimes in occupied Kashmir. Akram said the BJP government has mounted an organized campaign of terror and oppression against India's 180 million Muslims. He said the ruling clique perpetrated a pogrom against Muslims in April, killing thousands and desecrating their mosques. In Nepal, cable operators have banned all Indian news channels except the government-owned Doordarshan television. They took the decision amid mounting tensions over a map row between Kathmandu and New Delhi.
Although the decision has not been taken by the Nepalese government, Information Minister Yubaraj Khatiwala says Nepal may seek political and legal remedies against Indian media for attacking Nepal's sovereignty and dignity. This comes in the wake of public outrage against Indian media for its coverage, which citizens claimed portrayed Nepalese leadership in a bad light. Indian news channels indulged in character assassination of Nepalese leaders and of the Chinese envoy to Nepal, Ambassador Ho Young-ki. India and Nepal are currently engaged in a diplomatic scuffle after the Nepalese parliament claimed ownership of 3 disputed areas. New Delhi contests Kathmandu's claim.
We're now taking a short break, but stay tuned for more news. Welcome back. In Greece, violence broke out in Athens during a mass demonstration against the government's proposed law to curb public protests. Riot police fired tear gas and flash grenades at a group of protesters who hurled petrol bombs at them. The demonstrations were also held in 40 other cities apart from the capital. More than 10,000 peaceful protesters gathered in central Athens, many supporting a labor union backed by Greek Communist Party. But Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis has not backed down, saying he is determined to stop gatherings from disrupting traffic and commercial activity.
The freedom for someone to be able to get to a hospital, to get to his job, to his home, to be able to go out for a walk with his kids is just as precious as the freedom to demonstrate. In a democracy, the right of one does not overrule the right of the rest.
UNESCO says it must be notified of any change in the status of Istanbul's 6th century Hagia Sophia Museum. The UN cultural body said any changes to the museum status may have to be reviewed by its World Heritage Committee. It said the Hagia Sophia was on its list of World Heritage Sites as a museum and had certain commitments and legal obligations. Meanwhile, a spokesperson for Turkish president says reopening Hagia Sophia for prayers will not deprive it of its identity. He said the place will always be a part of the world's historical heritage. The site was at the center of both the Christian Byzantine and Muslim Ottoman empires. Turkey's top administrative court is likely to announce today that the 1934 conversion of the Hagia Sophia into a museum was unlawful. In Serbia, the government has scrapped plans to impose a weekend COVID-19 curfew in Belgrade after 2 nights of protests. A government crisis group tasked with fighting the virus has decided instead to ban public gatherings of more than 10 people. This came after violent clashes broke out between the police and people protesting the lockdown measures. Thousands violated the ban last night by staging a sit-in in front of the parliament amid heavy police presence. Meanwhile, Russia has rejected Serbian media reports alleging Moscow of fueling the unrest. Sudan's Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok has replaced the finance, foreign, energy and health ministers and 3 others as part of a sweeping reshuffle. In a statement, the government said Hamdok has named interim replacements to lead all 7 ministries. Hamdok leads a government of technocrats under a 39-month power-sharing agreement between the military and civilian groups. The agreement was reached following the removal of the country's long-time ruler Omar al-Bashir last year. The cabinet reshuffle comes 9 days after violent protests against government's coronavirus response and economic crisis. Militiamen have killed at least 25 people in Congo's northeastern Ituri province. Officials said the assailants targeted the civilian population in the locality of Sindani-Akisi. A village official said 10 wounded people have been transferred to a hospital in Bunia, capital of Ituri. The Gold-Ridge province's governor Jean Bamanesita confirmed the attack, but did not have the exact figures of casualties. Attacks on civilians in the eastern DRC have increased in recent months, triggering anger against the UN peacekeeping force in the country. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled President Trump's financial records can be examined by prosecutors in New York. In a related case, the court ruled this information did not have to be shared with the Congress. Since Richard Nixon, Trump is the first president to not make his tax returns public. The Supreme Court ruled by a majority of 7-2 that the president did not have absolute immunity from criminal investigation. The court said Congress had significant but not limitless power to request the president's personal information. In this case, the court returned the case to the lower courts. Trump blasted the decision on Twitter, saying it is a political prosecution. Google has launched the world's first commercial high-speed internet using balloons to the Kenya villages. More about this unique service in this report.
A fleet of balloons provides affordable 4G internet service in remote regions of Rift Valley. It's the first balloon-powered internet to launch in Africa and the first non-emergency commercial deployment in the world. The technology has been used before, but not commercially. The service is run by Loon, a unit of Google's parent Alphabet, and Telecom Kenya, the East African nation's third-largest telecom operator.
Loon is finally in Kenya. Kenya being the first country in the world to commercialize the technology. This is basically base stations up even beyond where the planes are.
The large balloons carry a solar panel and battery and float in the upper atmosphere, high above planes and weather. They also have software equipped with artificial intelligence to navigate the flight paths without much human intervention.
This will help me reach out to people even in the diaspora because it has really been hard due to poor network around here. We are sometimes left behind when it comes to communication. And you want to send some honey to people, but mode of communication becomes a challenge.
According to Loon, the airborne base stations have much wider coverage, about 100 times the area of a traditional cell phone tower.
Bali is hosting the first center to return captive and rescue dolphins to the wild. The founder of the Dolphin Project, the charity that runs the center, says this model can be replicated in other countries. Let's find out more in this report.
Just a year ago, Rambo the dolphin was confined to a shallow chlorinated pool in an Indonesian hotel in the island of Bali, entertaining visitors from around the world by jumping through hoops. Now, the bottlenose dolphin, estimated to be about 15 years old, is swimming freely after being brought to what organizers say is the world's first permanent rehabilitation center. This is a project initiated by Bali's government and animal rights groups.
Well, it's very exciting. It's been 50 years in the making. It's the first dolphin sanctuary anywhere in the world. And it's a model. It can be duplicated. And we're trying to do that in Europe as well, in Italy and in Crete.
A 2019 report says more than 3,000 dolphins were in captivity in 336 entertainment venues globally as part of an industry generating up to $5.5 billion annually. Returning dolphins to the wild depends on their health and capability to catch prey and interact with other dolphins. One problem is that dolphins often switch off their sonar in captivity.
And once we will relocate them to be released, they will go to the area where they were originally captured, because we know where they were captured in Central Java. So we aim to relocate them to their area that they know, where they grew up.
The Bali government hopes to emulate the dolphin project to save other species. For Rick O'Barry, who in the past trained dolphins used in the TV series Flipper, opening the sanctuary in Bali is another step in his goal to end captivity.
The Eurogroup of finance ministers have elected Ireland's Pascal Donoghue as its new chair. Donoghue defeated Spain's Nadia Calvino and his Luxembourg counterpart Pierre Germana in 2 rounds of votes. He will take over from the outgoing president Mario Centeno on 13th July and will serve until the end of 2022. Donoghue will have to steer the Eurozone out of its worst ever recession. In a statement after his election, Donoghue said he will seek to build bridges amongst all members of the Euro area. Asia-Pacific markets have fallen as investors remain cautious due to the rising number of COVID-19 cases around the world. Coronavirus anxiety dominated market sentiment on a day where major economic releases were scarce. Chinese mainland markets traded mixed. The Shanghai Composite was down over 0.5%, while the Shenzhen Composite gained 0.5%. The Nikkei 225 in Japan was down fractionally, while the Topix Index fell over 0.5%. In South Korea, the Kospi Index too lost over 0.5%. Australia's benchmark ASX 200 erased some of its earlier losses, but is still down marginally. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index too wandered into negative territory. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.